Welcome to Making IT Carbon Free. Our aim with this podcast is simple: to discuss how to reduce the carbon emissions linked to the world of IT and to begin to reduce the damage IT is having on the environment. In this series, you'll find innovations, advice, actions and ideas from industry specialists and people across all areas of the business. There's a lot of talk about carbon neutrality, so let's turn it from talk into action.
Right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Making IT Carbon Free podcast. This is the first in what we hope is going to become a long-running series covering sustainability in IT. Just to set the scene, my name's Mark Butcher. I'm the commercial director for a Scottish data centre and cloud provider called DataVita. And sustainability is very important to us, mainly because we operate one of the most environmentally efficient data centres in the UK, and we're very passionate about the subject area. Hence why I'm kind of sitting here today, hoping to share my thoughts on the subject and the thoughts of my guests. And today I've got two great guests sharing their thoughts on the subject. The first is Dr. Grazia Fronteso from a company you may have heard of, Google Cloud, based out of Switzerland. And secondly, but no less importantly, I've got Donovan Justice from Digital Detox, a design agency based out of the marginally less glamorous Brixton in London. Grazia, could you just give me a quick introduction to your role in Google and your place in the organisation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me here today. So I joined Google Cloud almost 3 years ago here in Zurich in Switzerland, and I lead a team of great customer engineers who help customers in the public sector to solve their biggest challenges.
Thank you very much. So, Donovan, what about you? What's your role in Digital Detox?
Hi, Mark. Well, we work together, so we know each other quite well. So thanks for the invite. Very appreciated. I'm Donovan. I'm the CEO of Digital Detox. As you said, we're based in Brixton. We're a product engineering team. So we spend a lot of our time designing and building great digital experiences. But actually more recently, kind of just been, I guess, learning and focusing our efforts on how to do that a little bit more sustainably, or in other words, more efficiently. So quite a good time with cloud services. We use them quite often, but actually how do we, from the other side of the fence, build and design more sustainable experiences? And I'd love to share some ideas with you today.
Thank you. Well, then, thank you very much, both of you. So as a bit more background, I don't think it can really be disputed that the world's facing a climate crisis. I think that's been covered in a great amount of depth, and change is critically needed if we want to try and turn things around, or at least even slow down the pace of the damage. Most organisations have got some kind of sustainability strategy, but until now, the focus has been mostly on things like transport, on buildings, on manufacturing, that kind of thing. There hasn't really been enough talk about the negative impact that IT services are having on the environment. It's not easy to quantify the exact figures, and not helped by the fact that there are some fairly made up stats that get thrown around the industry. We're all kind of guilty of that. But one kind of commonly agreed fact is that last year, internet usage in general was responsible for generating roughly around 1 billion tonnes of CO2. If you want to compare this to get some context, if you look at the aviation sector pre-COVID, in 2019, worldwide flights, so every flight across the world, only produced around 915 million tonnes of CO2. So if you look at it in context, if the internet was a country, it would actually be the world's 6th largest polluter. And this problem is predicted to get kind of worse, not better, with the expectation that it could be as bad as a factor of 8 to 10 times worse by the year 2030. And this is being driven obviously by the massive adoption of IT services across the world, the growth in the number of data centres, the growth in the number of services that are being deployed, everything that's happening. OVO Energy, the energy company in the UK, produced a great stat last year that kind of cuts to the heart of the British people's obsession with being polite. If everyone in Britain sent one less thank you email a day, we could save the equivalent carbon of around 81,000 flights to Madrid from the UK. Where this comes from is every day the Brits, we're so horribly polite. We send 64 million unnecessary emails. You know, the kind of emails where we just say thank you. It's an absolutely staggering number. So clearly something needs to change, and that's the purpose of this podcast series. And my personal experience from more than 20 years in the industry is that there is an absolute vast amount of waste floating around in the IT industry in terms of wasted infrastructure, oversized services, some badly designed. And it means there are some really easy opportunities to make a huge dent in the carbon footprint of the IT industry. And it doesn't matter whether you're a business user, a consumer, or someone from central IT. Everything we do within an organisation has some kind of impact on the carbon footprint of the IT of your organisation. But Grazia, what's your view on IT's impact on the environment?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's a great question. I mean, climate change is happening now, right, and affect everyone. A recent report had confirmed that the decade going between 2010 to 2019 has been the hottest decade over the last 140 years. So the ocean temperature, for example, in 2019 was the highest ever reported. And the scientists also said, the ones that have written this report, they also pointed out that carbon dioxide, as you mentioned, and other greenhouse gases are really the main sources of this global warming. So it's really everyone's responsibility to protect our environment. It starts from the single individuals to small and large companies, and then up to governments. And the way then you use technology and you choose technology plays also an important role. So take the example of a CIO of a big company, right? He or she can actually be the agent of change and really drive transformation in their organization. So how can a CIO be the agent of change? So number one, for example, you as a CIO can adopt a technology that has been built with the sustainability in mind. And so basically in this way, you reduce the immediate impact of your IT operations. And you also reduce the emissions due to the use of that technology, right? Number two, you can also then use IT technology to completely reimagine your solution and your business models to be more sustainable, right? So you can transform various parts of your business to be more sustainable. And then number three, you guess what? Google Cloud can really help you with those challenges. We know that data centers consume lots of energy. So roughly is 1% of the world energy consumed in the world. And so we can we really want to make sure that we build our data center in a very efficient way.
Thank you. No, thank you. So, Donovan, from your perspective, then, I've always said about you is that you guys do the exciting bit and you build the applications for your customers on platforms like Google. So, do you share Grazia's view? What is the actual problem?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it does all come down to network and data. However you look at it, the amount of network you generate and the amount of data transferred, that's ultimately what's been powering. And all does go back down to that power source. But actually, I think with our lens on a digital detox, it's really about a little bit more upstream. Grazia, you referred to like the CIOs and the influence of change. And absolutely, I have a view I'd like to share in the right time around actually it's top down, little bottom up. You know, it's really down to some of the biggest companies in the world to make those changes and for that to trickle down. But really, I'm really interested in focusing our efforts at DD at, you know, working with designers and developers, raising awareness that they have a role. To be honest, some of the stats that Mark mentioned, those were the same stats that captured my attention originally, because, you know, we have 3 pillars in our company: people, planet, and technology. We're a technology company, so we love tech. We want to do the right things on behalf of our clients, obviously for society and people. But planet was a really hard one. And it was a question we asked ourselves for quite some time. What do we do? I'm a developer, what's my role? I'm a designer, what's my role? And actually there's a lot we can do there. You know, as the developers, we design applications and build applications. We're responsible for generating that network traffic. We're responsible for the compression and some of the caching involved in those applications. So there's a role to play. As a designer, and this is the hardest one, I think a lot of people are like, what do designers do? Well, designers work with the business to design experiences. So you have the choice whether you use an image for a background, a video for a background. You have the choice when to invoke chat, which in turn invokes WebSockets and technologies involved at the back of that. So I think, the impact, is certainly not simple, but it is down to network and data. But the change and who's responsible, I couldn't agree more to everybody. And I think designers and developers play a very big part in that. And that's something we've done a lot of work on over the last, I think perhaps 12 months or so, and learned from a lot of really good other organizations. So for me, it's not just cloud. It is a much broader picture. It's a lot more complicated picture, but everybody plays a role.
And I think sorry, I was going to say, John, I think probably the biggest problem that I've seen is actually getting those various parts of the organisation to work together and understand how their actions contribute positively and negatively.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the time in the large organizations, it's a CSR policy, it's a policy, and then it's like, well, there's our scope 1 and scope 2 contributions to our supply chain, to our business travel. We're done. And it's like, well, actually, that's the point we're trying to make, is actually digital falls nicely into that scope 3 category. And that's a very large category. The services you buy, the services you create, they do have an impact. Ultimately, there is a data source, as you mentioned, which is quite large. So I think that's the other point we try to get across quite clearly, is digital isn't free. We've got a nice article on our site, which I'm really happy to share, that, yes, going remote for us as a company reduced our carbon footprint, but it wasn't zero. By using digital services, it isn't free. And I think the most important part, it's not bad. It's highly likely to be more sustainable. Don't get me wrong. I love technology, but it's about measuring it and recording it. It's about understanding what you're doing and what the change is. I think that's another really important part, is the measuring and recording of that digital footprint alongside everything else going on. Because that's something we're not seeing happen often, and it's a big opportunity as well in recording and trying to reduce that. So I think designers, developers play a part. Absolutely, C-level plays a part. Governments play a part, and we know Google and plays a huge part as well for the tech and expertise. But it's certainly something that just needs to be measured and accounted for.
And I think from a data gathering perspective, that is actually a very important point. Is there isn't really a single consistent way that we have of actually measuring this anywhere. And it would actually be very good for that to be created, probably at a governmental level. And to give some credit actually to people like Google, they're probably one of the most transparent organisations when it comes to talking about the impact of their services on the environment, in terms of some of the calculations, the sharing of the information, and actually being more transparent about how they're improving things. So great, kind of going back to your views of IT's impact on the environment, why is sustainability important to Google?
Yeah, Max, let me share first why is sustainability important for me. I spent more than 9 years working in academia in the field of atmospheric physics and climate modeling. So I was actually running myself simulation of the climate of the Earth. So how it's going to look like in the next 100 years, for example, right? And I could really see some pretty scary results over there. So I really believe this is a topic that everyone has to take very seriously. And so that's why I'm also very proud to be working at Google Cloud, because sustainability has been really a core value for us since Google was founded 23 years ago. So if we look at the last 23 years and somehow breaking down into 3 decades, right? You can see that by the end of our first decade, we were the first major company to be carbon neutral in our operations. And then by the end of the second decade, we achieved 100% renewable energy matching our electricity consumption with the clean energy for our data centers and also our offices around the world. And in 2019, we became the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in history. And also early last year, we issued something around 60 billion in sustainable bonds. So it was 5.75 billion. So that has been the largest in any company in history. And for the next decades, we are raising our bar even higher, because by 2030, we aim to be the first major company to operate carbon-free. So carbon-free means basically eliminating all our entire legacy carbon footprint, running completely on renewable energy 24/7, right? So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so we will achieve this by purchasing carbon-free energy everywhere we operate, also using technology that, of course, makes this possible, right? We will also support specific policies that will create a zero carbon electricity system. So, and also in this process, we want to enable more than 10,000 green jobs in the next 5 years.
Wow, that's very impressive. Awesome.
Yeah, that is, yeah. So I know what kind of DataVita, what we're doing in our data centers, and I think actually that one of the reasons why we chose to partner with Google was actually your sustainability message, if I'm being brutally frank, because we found it aligned really well with what we were doing. So in terms of similar goals, we've obviously been using 100% renewable power for quite some time, and the data center, massively efficient in terms of the design. It's about 70 or 80% more efficient than the classic kind of on-premise data centers, which most of them are pretty ugly actually. The on-premise facilities. I don't think people realise how bad they are. But from our perspective, we're also going towards a goal of by 2025 to be entirely off the grid, so totally self-generated power. So we're kind of doing that as part of our plans as well to meet that same status for carbon neutrality where possible. But what are the next steps for Google then in the field of sustainability? What will happen next? In the third decade?
Sure, we are raising our bar higher and higher. And so by 2030, we aim to be the first major company to operate carbon-free. So carbon-free means basically eliminating our entire legacy carbon footprint, running completely on renewable energy for 24/7. So 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And so we will achieve that by purchasing carbon-free energy everywhere we operate, using technology that makes this possible, of course. And we will also work on supporting policies that will create a zero carbon electricity system. And in this process, we also want to enable more than 10,000 green jobs in the first 5 years. So let me make an example to make this even more concrete. So this means that every email sent with Gmail, every Google search, every time that you use Google Maps to find your fastest route, or you watch a video on YouTube, right? And also, even more, every customer application running on Google Cloud will have zero carbon footprint from our data centers. And so that's pretty incredible if you think about it, right? So at Google, we really see those challenges as an opportunity. But of course, no company can solve a challenge like climate change alone. So that's why we also want to invest in creating the tools, right, and the technologies that can create a carbon-free world.
Yeah, if I can just jump in there as well. I think from our perspective as well, Grazie, I think it's incredible to know what's going on behind those services. But actually on the other side as well, I usually have a lot of conversations with our clients and framing actually cloud services as a finite resource, not infinite. And I think I always said to Mark, when I certainly started development and there were things on premise, we had lots of kind of limitations, for a better word. We had non-functional requirements to say, well, we can only hit this endpoint so many times, can only transfer this amount of data for this application. I mean, a great example where things are just, from an application side keep bloating and there doesn't seem to be an end to it is image formats. I had a look, for example, as one example, the HTTP archive, and images over the last 3 years, for example, have increased in size by 53%. So as much as incredible work's happening on behind the cloud and the efficiencies and the optimizations and the zero nature of it, really from the application side, I think there's so much more there. We've got the tools on hand to reduce the load or not treat it like this infinite resource. If I work with a younger engineering team, it's like, well, I have cloud, let's just, hit that session or hit that API as many times as we need it. Whereas actually it's just reining things in. I think we can still build those experiences in the first place to be much, much lighter and more efficient, I feel as well we have the tools, like, for example, Google Lighthouse, pretty amazing piece of development toolkit. So if we do our part and design and are mindful of the designing of sustainable applications, mindful of how to build them sustainably and efficiently, and then we put the pressure on cloud services to fulfill those, and cloud services obviously doing their best to make it efficient. Mark mentioned that stat around network traffic increasing. I think HP did a report that 2% of the world's electricity now is obviously digital. By 2030, it's expected to be 8%. That's a huge increase in demand. And really, I think the whole point is everyone's got to play their part to just flatten that down. So let's build more, but just smarter. I think that's really what we're trying to get at. So we've got a slightly different lens, but trying to obviously put less load on cloud services from our side.
I mean,
because at the moment it is bloating, and that's the concern we have, is there's no real rules for trying to do it more efficiently or build it more efficiently.
So I was going to say, Don, one of the things that you always talk about is the cultural shift that has to happen. So actually, how do you actually get sustainability ingrained into the culture from a kind of a business requirements identification phase all the way through to the development phase and into life, and how do you maintain that through the process? Because one of the things that we've seen on a couple of projects that we've worked on together is if you don't get the culture right with the kind of the requirements gathering, you actually end up with bloated, inefficient code, just from either from a design and operational or just a functional perspective. Is that something that you think is really important for organizations?
Massively. And I think it's actually a value alignment. So, there's a huge difference between a team sitting in an office building global applications. These are large applications with huge, one of our clients is a huge telco, got 550 million customers globally. When you build a chat service, that has a big impact on cloud services. It's a very small, subtle difference in the code. It could be a few lines of code. It could literally just be a button instead of a chatbot that invokes traffic, one versus the other. So I think to answer your question, it's awareness and it's understanding what your role is and feeling part of that overall company objective and commitment. And I think that it's a combination of awareness, it's a combination of education. I definitely think it's a combination of guidelines, some kind of guidelines, some non-functional requirements to kind of just frame the limitations we'd like everyone to work with. But also on a more positive note, if you measure where you start, you follow those guidelines through, and it's part of regular, almost gamified, like you have performance guidelines, we have accessibility guidelines. These are all really positive measures. We are starting to talk about sustainable guidelines, which, by the way, are almost identical to performance guidelines. But to kind of get that cultural side, I think people just have to be made aware that they've got a part to play, because the common misunderstanding in digital teams is, well, that's something that happens out there for supply chain and purchasing power. It's got nothing to do with digital. And that's the point. It's got a big part to do with digital. And then I think you start that process of gamifying it and measuring it.
So we're going to cover the application end of the spectrum, the design end of the spectrum. And so Google, go back there. So you've been very open about your goals, and there's no doubt they're massively ambitious. But I suppose, Google are nothing if not ambitious, very clearly. So without diving too deeply into the technology, what does kind of Google do inside their data centers, and what's been achieved so far in terms of sustainability, just from that perspective?
Yeah, so we applied sustainability really across Alphabet in an holistic way. So in our data centers, but also in the way we design offices, we do transit with bikes, and also what we do with the food waste. And also all around our product area as well. So for example, in Google Maps now, you can also find information about electric vehicles, charging stations, right? And bike sharing location in some cities around the world. But then everything starts in our data centers. So we have worked really hard to make Google data centers the most efficient computing network in the world. And we have done this by designing, building, and operating each data centers to maximize an efficient use of energy, water, and materials. So on average, a Google data center is 2 times more efficient than a typical enterprise data center. And compared to 5 years ago, we now deliver around 7 times more computing power with the same amount of electrical power, right? And so we also work on constantly deliver energy savings, right? So we managed to get 30% of, on average, of energy savings thanks to our cooling system, which is powered by artificial intelligence. And we also share all our detailed performance data to help move the industry going forward. As you mentioned, Donovan, we really need to do this work together. So like Google is sharing all these detailed performance data to also help the industry to adopt the same approach. So let me also kind of like make a step back and provide also some more context here in terms of like data centers industry. So the data center industry uses a very specific unit to measure efficiency, and this is called PUE, which stands for Power Usage Effectiveness. And so, for example, if you have a PUE equal to, this means that for every watt of IT power, you actually have an additional watt which is consumed to cool and distribute the power of the IT equipment. And so basically, like a PUE of 1 means basically that all the energy is used for computing. So the closer you are to 1, the better, right? The more efficient your data center is. And so we report an average PUE for all our Google data center of 1.10, which really makes our data centers among the most efficient in the world. And we have been also the first company in North America to achieve a multi-site ISO certification for the way that we do energy management system. And we embed really this concept, this principle of circular economy into really the core of Google infrastructure, operation, and culture.
So, I mean, that is, the PUE bit is kind of fascinating because from our perspective, our data center operates with a design PUE of 1.18. And so clearly, we're not quite at the Google level, but we're not that far behind. But it's astonishing when you compare that to the average enterprise data center that you said, because most of the ones that we see operate best case at about 1.8. I have seen some of 2 to 2.5, or even more in some horrible cases. And I think people don't realise how much money they're actually burning at the same time by operating so inefficiently, because it's not just about saving the planet. And that's actually a nice thing, is actually by being more efficient, by being more sustainable, there is actually an opportunity for organisations to make vast cost efficiency savings as well, which they can then invest in more developments, more services, more improvements for their organisations. So Donovan, from your perspective, how are you getting this on the table with your customers then? How's it impacting how your teams are developing applications?
Well, the most important things to our customers is their customers. So not only at a kind of corporate level are they kind of drawing value alignment with society's concerns and their own concerns. I've met some incredible people within these organizations who do care about our future and building a sustainable future. But the most important thing is that if we build something sustainable, it kind of reminds me of building something more performant. Something more performant we know is directly correlated to a customer experience. A customer experience is directly correlated to how quick that experience is. There's a lot of statistics out there, a lot of research done in that space. It also kind of reminds me, for example, around perhaps even the early days of accessibility standards. Somebody perhaps could ask me the same question, like, why would I spend all this extra money on accessibility? And it's these indirect effects that I think are more important. The benefits of accessibility is a simpler and more pleasant experience, not to mention it's a more inclusive experience, but it's also fantastic for SEO and great semantics. And that comes back then to sustainability. It is a good thing to do because you're going to build ultimately leaner and lighter applications. You do not have to compromise on the customer experience. It's some very simple changes that we're really happy to talk about later. Really practical small things make a big impact. But also, you build things leaner. It costs less to procure the services, cloud services, to run these applications. Build things sustainably. They run faster. You have happier customers. And the thing we're working really hard on this year is if you build things more sustainably, you can start contributing, or digital can start contributing to a company's CSR policy. So there's quite a lot of benefit. And not to mention, again, some people, well, actually, I say most, but most people actually do care and do want to do something. But it does come down to that acquisition, those retention KPIs. It does come back to customer engagement. And we can really map and easily map the changes you make here will come down and influence both CSR and customer experience.
And I think one of the things that I've seen from some of these projects has actually been kind of the light bulb moment when people realise their actions have consequences. When you actually start talking about some of these very small things and they see the spiralling impact, even things just like, I think that was that one example we had, Donovan, with the marketing team who are distributing every single kind of video format in ultra high definition formats with full audio distributed, and then not realising that actually no one was ever playing the audio, and it was never actually being consumed on devices that could even interpret the format correctly.
Well, no, they were using the mute attributes, obviously, in the video tag. So they're muting the track, but still delivering the audio track. So it's not like, okay, just to be clear, I love technology, and I think it's going to be a tool to get us out of this mess. But it's got to be used appropriately, and we have to use the latest and newest technologies, or at least acknowledge them, and not squander that data and network traffic. And video is a great example, because a lot of people say to me, Donovan, why are you even on a video now? This is unsustainable. Well, actually, I suspect if we all flew around the world to see each other, that might have perhaps been a little bit less advantageous in this video. But nothing's good or bad, because the reality is, by us kind of doing our best here to raise awareness of this and spread this topic, this could have a really positive influence. But coming back to video, for example, if somebody wanted to enjoy 4K video, first thing a developer needs to do is please make sure the device rendering the video can actually render that amount of pixels. You'll be surprised how many times the video is delivered and it can't be rendered actually on the device. You don't even get to see that data in the first place. Secondly, from a user experience perspective, this is where a designer plays a part. Encourage people to download the video. If you're going to watch a series, download it. Because actually, if you do need to scrobble back, scrobble forward, etc., of course I have infinite resources to deliver it real time, but it's not much more to just say to a client, hey, it's going to be a better option if you download it, so it's only done once. And it's incredibly small changes, but at scale, and at the scale that both Google and other cloud services provide, or the scale that digital is now, even if 2 or 3% of people started to download their favorite series and watch it, that would make a huge difference.
Okay, so going back then to you, Gracia. So you mentioned at the beginning that you and your team support customers to solve challenges. You're always building out new services and helping them transform what they're doing and modernise applications, and do all these fantastic things. But how does everything that we've kind of discussed today benefit your customers? How does all this lovely sustainability kind of thing actually help the average customer?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's a really great question. I mean, in general, I would say that cloud technologies supports many products at a time, and so it can be more efficiently distribute resources, right, among many users, right? And so this really means that you can do more computing with less energy. And then, like in general, most of my customers in the public sector, they do have sustainability goals embedded into their agenda, especially here in Europe. So if my customers adopt technology that has been built with the sustainability in mind, right, they reduce the impact of their IT operations. And also they can use this technology, this IT technology, to reimagine their solution and their business models to really be more sustainable. So they can transform different areas of their business into a more sustainable way. And also because of our constant energy efforts in efficiency for our data centers, our cloud is really better for the environment. So organizations that move IT infrastructure and application from a self-managed data center or a co-location facility to Google Cloud, they can reduce the net carbon emissions of their computing down to zero. And also want to say, like, a very simple, perhaps something very simple to remember is that Google Cloud operates the cleanest cloud in the industry. So perhaps if there is one thing you should all remember out of what I said today is really that one. Google Cloud operates the cleanest cloud in the industry.
So I think, yeah, that's a good point. Yes, I think, Donovan, from your perspective, then the one thing you need to take away from today is you need to build everything on Google Cloud. There you go. That's
well, we do build quite a lot on GCP, but also remember between that device, there's three parts that make up this little ecosystem. You have the device itself that needs to be charged, and that has an element to it, and you'll be surprised how big it was. I think when we looked at it last time, it was roughly about 30%. You have the ICT network. This needs to go across 4G, Wi-Fi. These networks need to be maintained. And then obviously you've got Google itself and the cloud services and behind that. So that for me is why perhaps I'm so interested in actually the responsibility right upstream for developers and designers to understand their role. And it's hard to understand your role, but why we're pretty at Digital Detox really hard behind the scenes, and so are others, on creating some kind of guidelines for designers and developers to at least acknowledge their role. And just talking about guidelines as well, and Mark, I'll share the link with you. There's also some great work now by a guy called Tom Greenwood at Whole Grain Studios. They've just launched Sustainable Web Design Guidelines. And it's really worthwhile, again, reading that. I'm seeing it's really new, but it's really interesting to see people starting to grapple with, what do I need to do as a designer or developer? And just another little trend I've been really interested watching. There was a company called Organic Basics. Again, I'll share the link in Denmark. They've created a subdomain called Low Impact, where they've looked at their customer experience and they've kind of used, for example, vector graphics instead of images to try to reduce the size of their site and the demand it has. And they've got service workers in, for example, to do a little bit more caching so it can work offline, lo-fi, li-fi. So again, there's quite a lot I think can be done upstream. And again, obviously, if Google's got everything sorted out downstream and the designers and developers are working upstream, I think that's where everybody plays our part in solving this problem.
Thank you. So there's a lot of concepts there. There's a lot. So before we kind of wrap up, have you got any other real world design or development change ideas that you think would actually really resonate? Where could people start from your perspective? You know, and some simple things they could focus on.
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned the one on video. It's such an easy one, I think, for people to understand. Another one I saw, which is really good. And by the way, these are simple changes. This isn't rocket science. These are really simple changes, and it's going to come down to those guidelines or some kind of a raising of awareness or collaboration. Another one I saw on the IPCC website, which I thought was fantastic, was when you download a document that's got a simple toggle, high definition or standard definition. You know, something as simple as that. Give people the options for consumers, and default it to single definition. But it's something like, for example, 72 DPI. That's perfectly fine for screen, unless you want to print it out. How many documents do you download at 300 DPI plus? That's high-end printing. Who prints them out? Or how often they print it out? And if somebody chooses high definition, raise it to them that this is a little less of a sustainable option. You know, perhaps try and do some measurement. There are some tools out there to do measurement. But if we don't give the options and explain the impact to consumers, they won't know any better. And I think that's the point. I think a lot of people would favor doing something a little bit more sustainable. Another good example is the last one perhaps is communication preferences. You know, we'll speak to our clients and they'll say, our customers want a lot of communication, regular updates, if the tariff's changing, if the contract's changing, etc. But as we alluded to it, these communication preferences in this network traffic all has an overhead, not on a single basis, but at a global basis. Give people options, explain to them that by changing the communication preferences, you know, it does have an impact on what you're trying to do as an organization, which is fulfill your CSR goals and your sustainability commitments. But on the other hand, it's not black or white. If you prefer the communication, we'll absolutely deliver it as a service. But again, give those options to consumers. I think corporates, and particularly people building digital services, have a role to provide options and allow the consumers to choose what they feel is fit. And if it's something to do on sustainability, I'll speak for myself. I'm aware that this decision has a negative impact and I have a choice. I would like to think I would choose the option that's more sustainable. We don't want it to be in absolutely everything we do because it'll be too much. And I think these things we can automate. But I think optionality and awareness, and I think some of the biggest brands in the world leading that in the digital space for me is quite exciting. And I think if we look at it from the perspective I've explained in those two examples, it's going to save you money, it's going to be more sustainable, and I just think it's the right thing to do. And it has to be top down.
Thank you, Don. So I think I would tend to agree with that. I think where I'm seeing it both from a kind of a Google perspective and a DataVita perspective, because we are very similar zones in this area, is we have some really easy wins around just people moving out of their legacy data centers. Yes, there are big investments people have in there, but actually you can typically get a return on that investment from transitioning away from those data centers within as little as 18 months in some cases. And look at how they're developing applications and services. Look at the development culture to actually see, are they oversizing things by default? Are they using the wrong kind of instances? Are they operating in the right region, with the right cloud provider as well? So there is so much people could do, and it's important that they start. And that was the whole, going back to the beginning, that was the whole purpose of this podcast. So I think today, we'll wrap up, and thank you, Gracia. Thank you, Donovan, for taking the time. Your insights have been really, really valuable, and I've kind of enjoyed talking to you. We could have carried on forever. So we're planning future episodes already, and we've got some other fantastic guests lined up. Not saying that the pair of you weren't fantastic, clearly.
We're the guinea pigs.
Happy to be the guinea pigs. Thank you so much, Mark, for having us here. Really enjoying talking to you and talking about those very important topics.
Thank you both. So with that, I think working together, we can all make it happen. So thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Making IT Carbon Free. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe and review wherever you listen to the podcast. We will really appreciate that effort, and we hope to welcome you back again in the next episode.